We're going to now focus on a session called Women Leading Climate Action for a Just Future. There have been numerous, I won't say countless, but numerous studies and reports that show that when women shape and participate in climate solutions, it leads to more sustainable, resilient, and effective climate outcomes. But on the other hand, when women are excluded from those discussions, we risk baking inequality and injustice into our visions of a greener future. So failing to slow or halt global warming has clearly catastrophic implications for all of us, all of humanity. But women will be disproportionately impacted because of the social, political, and economic inequalities they face in so many parts of the world. So this session will focus on the importance of promoting women's leadership in all levels of climate action as a precondition for an accelerated and just transition to low-carbon economies, as well as the opportunity that this transition presents for our economies and our societies. We often see this as an existential crisis, and indeed it is, but we should also look at the opportunities to reshape societies as we take action around climate change. And so to talk to this, we have three, as I've already said, extraordinary women who all in very different ways embody women that are leading climate action for a just future. Here we have Sophie Lambin, who is CEO and founder of Kite, a research and insights company. Sophie is also the editorial partner of the Women's Forum for the Economy and Society. The Women's Forum, which is an organization, I work for the New York Times, we have a lot of partnerships with, is an extraordinary organization. And they profile women's leadership perspectives and apply them to the social, environmental and economic issues of our time. And one of the ways that they do this is through cross-industry working groups, focusing on issues where women are disproportionately affected and where their leadership is paramount. We also have here Fiona Darroch. Fiona has been a practicing barrister since 1994, specializing in environmental law. She is the founder and chair of the board at Protimos, which she founded in 2002. Protimos helped to create local legal teams that provide access to law and legal education and that act for indigenous and marginalized communities in resource-rich developing economies, particularly in Southern and Eastern Africa. The organization was founded under the conviction that there is a real need for development lawyers to work in the interests of indigenous and marginalized communities, and that this need is best met by lawyers with a strong understanding of customary laws as well as other Western legal systems. She's also an opera singer and has performed here, I believe, many years ago. So we're lucky we'll have a performance at the end.
We'll be out of time.
No, well, so, and finally, Clare Du Bois. Clare is the founder and CEO of Tree Sisters, a social entrepreneur of some acclaim. Clare worked for 18 years facilitating groups, coaching business leaders on behavioral change, processes and personal growth before founding Tree Sisters. Tree Sisters is an extraordinary organization. It has led to the planting of over 2 million trees a year, and over 5 million trees in total so far. Is that right? And these trees are planted in the tropical belt around it, and she'll talk more about that. But what her organization, and the New York Times is also looking to partner with Tree Sisters. It's a new venture. So I actually said we had three people. We have a fourth going to talk from the floor in Charlotte Muller Stuart. Charlotte is one of the young students that is leading the Strike for Climate Action movement here in Scotland. Yeah. And as such, she is doing a great deal to raise awareness of her generation and making voices heard. She had an audience with Nicola Sturgeon, who will be here later on, and I believe, along with her sister, I don't know whether this is fake news, I read this, that you and your sister have converted the whole family to vegetarianism, but your dad definitely not. Anyway, let's get cracking. I'm going to start, Sophie. Everybody talks about how women will be disproportionately impacted by climate change. Your work shows the potential for women to lead climate action. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much for welcoming us here at Beyond Borders. I have had an extremely inspiring day, even though extremely hot as well. So, you know, the case for women leadership in climate goes far beyond a feminist agenda. Not there is anything wrong with a feminist agenda, as we heard earlier, but it's basically that climate change is such a big, complex problem that it calls for a big solution. And big solution means extensive impact, contribution from women. We need solutions that are going to be fundamentally changing the system within which we operate, and changing the system takes coalescing, negotiating, collaborating. We need solutions that are going to be very quickly bringing a return on investment for climate. And we need solutions that are going to be fundamentally inclusive in the outcome, to not exacerbate the inequalities that are already women are already subject to, as you were saying, Stephen. So yes, women are undoubtedly disproportionately impacted by the effect of climate change. And as you said, Stephen, this is most often the reflection of the fact they have that unequal position in society. So just to bring that comment to life, 80% of climate refugees are women. Women are 40 times more likely to die as a result of a climate event than men. The risk of violence for women and girls walking longer distances to fetch water is dramatically increasing. Women are impacted by air pollution much more significantly because of maternal health as well as other physiological reasons. So there is multiple ways in which the effect of climate exacerbate the impact on women, which on one hand create an opportunity, as that means women have a more acute understanding of what is at stake and a greater sense of urgency to take action. That's certainly one aspect, but there are other aspects which I'll come to in a minute. Climate problems have been understood for decades, and solutions have systematically missed the mark. An organization like the Women's Forum, or the organization that Mary Robinson, that many of you know, are leading, really contend that our failure to tackle climate change is really a reflection of our inability to tap into the transformative power of women and girls in climate action. It's also the failure to systematically bring that gender lens in the design of policies and mitigation and adaptation policies. If you look at the communique of the G20 under climate and environment, they say we want to contribute to create a sustainable and inclusive world. Gender is not mentioned a single time. G7 still yet to be seen what's going to come out. So women play a very important role by virtue of their role in society, but they also play a very important role by virtue of their mindset, by virtue of their role in the community, in society. And obviously, when we start talking about what is it about women, we need to be very watchful to not fall into stereotypes of women versus men. But this is really not the discussion. It's about tapping into the most untapped resource that is most readily available, and by the way, that represents 50% of the population, to accelerate and scale climate action. So there's lots of studies, and I'm going to cite a few, and there's many more of that in the research that we've done. But women have been actually forever more sustainable in the way they've managed the land, in agriculture, in the way they've managed finance. Their approach to climate is clearly shown that women have a much greater sense of the threat that climate change represents. They're much more willing to shift the purchasing decisions as a result of climate change, and we know that women remains the chief purchasing officer as well as the chief medical officer in a family. I was talking to Akia, who told me that a lot of the change in product design to develop much more climate-friendly products have been actually led by women. If we could increase woman participation or ownership of the land. For the moment, in a typical fashion, women do all the work, but they don't own the land. And the ability to, the potential to increase what we call climate smart practice will increase dramatically. The on-farm production yield will increase from 20 to 30% in poor countries if women were given land rights, and I'm sure Fiona will talk to that. Women entrepreneurs are more likely to develop business that have that a mindset of we can do good while doing well, and which is obviously very aligned with the mindset of the green economy. The focus of women innovation is much more geared towards solutions that are inclusive, and so forth and so on. And maybe lastly, I could talk about the women approach to negotiation, which is very cruelly needed. And if you take COP21 that was led by Christiana Figueres, Laurence Tubiana, Rachel Kreit, all women, weaving and working behind the scenes, it's still standing despite Mr. Trump pulling out. Christiana Figueres confided to me one day, she said, the climate agreement, Sophie, will never be broken. I said, really? Why? I mean, how come Trump's leaving? He said, the way we did it as women behind the scene is to make sure that every man who signed it felt it was their own. That's why it will never be broken.
Yeah. I mean, the work that Laurence Tubiana and Christina did was absolutely fundamental to the COP Climate Accord. It was women that delivered that accord. Men took the credit, women delivered it.
But it was. If I can just finish to that sort of scene set, if you will, that's how we need to start designing climate solution, to systematically, intentionally bring women into the equation. And it could not only contribute to address the issues of climate change, but they could actually be an opportunity to redress the status of women in society, because the opportunity for women to participate in the green economy is tremendous, notwithstanding the fact that not bringing women would be have dire consequences for women. And as Yunus says, dire things happen to people who live in dire economic situation, but it really truly has the potential to redress the status of women in society.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Fiona, you work in Indigenous communities. So how do better rights access law and legal education for and secured by women in those communities lead to better outcomes for climate action?
So I should just begin by saying that my own conviction, and the conviction of the people that I work with on this, is that what is really needed is black letter law that you can take into the courts and use as a cause of action on behalf of people who are suffering. Now, if I take the example of the public interest law clinic we have in Lesotho, we act for, when I say we, I mean our local lawyers, who are my brethren over there, both women, I'd like to say. They act on behalf of people who have been resettled or discomforted in a whole range of different ways by the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, which is the construction of a great wealth of enormous dams and transfer tunnels, which sells the water from Lesotho to those who can afford to buy it in South Africa. Now, the range of discriminatory issues that concept gives rise to is far beyond the capacity of this particular session. But if you take what impact the dams have had upon the communities, there's not just the climate, they've wrecked their entire lives. And what we are able to do over there is to take the treaty law, which set up this project in the first place, and we can go into the courts in Lesotho, which we do when we're unable to reach a settlement, and get landmark cases going, which will then make precedent. And so from a climate change perspective, what is sad is that there is very little hard law which you can actually take into the courts and start talking about as a cause of action for these communities. We are all yearning for the day when those kinds of black letter law become enacted and you can actually go into court and say, here is how it's happened. This is the environmental degradation. This is all the other rubbish that's happening. You need to stop doing that by way of public interest litigation, or there are other ways of looking at it in terms of corporate degradation, environmental degradation, which is actually done without any shred of a doubt by corporates, that has a real direct measurable impact upon climate change. There's lots of stuff, but there aren't any laws that allow you to get into court. So that's the first and rather depressing answer. Sorry, not as inspiring.
And Clare, you've done extraordinary work the past few years with your tree planting, but what's fascinating about how the whole philosophy is engaged around women. Can you talk to us about this? Why are women the focus of the charity when actually everyone is needed, not just women?
Yeah, it's edgy. Yeah. It's an edgy place. Because it's going to take all of us. And actually, I mean, Tree Sisters was given to me in a car crash. So I was swerving on ice. I hit a tree rather than going over an edge, which is an amazing metaphor for humanity not going over an edge because of reforestation. It took me about 3 years to get that. But anyway. But I literally heard a voice in the car, and it was just telling me what to do. And it was saying, and it's called Tree Sisters, and blah, 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 and it's this, and it's that. And you know, you have to mobilize the women. The women are the missing piece. Women are the earth, are the womb carriers, and earth is womb. You know, blah, blah, blah. You have to make it as normal to give back to nature as it currently is to take nature for granted. And then in the middle of that, women have to remember who and what they really are. Feminine consciousness has to be reinstated, or it's over.
Help me unpack that for me, as a man.
Well, you're a man. No. Well, I needed it unpacking for me. I mean, this was like, the first thing that I heard when I crashed was you have to reforest the tropics within 10 years. Which was just like, I didn't ask for this job. But we are living in the tail end or the dregs of a patriarchal society. We've been living inside, we've all adopted or been indoctrinated with a consciousness that exists, which is the shadow masculine, which is the masculine considering itself superior to and dominant to the feminine. And you can say women and nature share a common history. What's been done to one has been done to the other. You know, we've been tamed, we've been conditioned, we've been pulled away from our power. Those of us that are alive today in Western women, we have the witch burnings in our blood. It's never been dealt with. It was over 300 years of raging persecution, where if you didn't belong to your man, even if you did belong to your man, if he died, you were fair game because they wanted your money. It was an industry, the witch burnings, and it was designed very, very specifically to disempower women. Why? Because we have to be extraordinarily powerful. Why else would you need to do that? But we were separated from ourselves, separated from who and what we really are, and separated from each other. So what it leads to is this dominant paradigm which basically sees life as something to control and own, that doesn't see it as sacred, it doesn't see women as sacred, doesn't see ourselves. Nothing is sacred. It's all there simply to take and use. And so we have an economy that reflects that. Our economy is based upon the death of nature. There is only one future for our species while our economy stays the way it is. Our economy is simply an expression of the consciousness that has become normalized, which is a normalized form of insanity, quite frankly. So we're living in insane times, and the planet is screaming because essentially we are destabilizing every living system that she has. You can't take anything from an ecosystem without it having a knock-on effect. But now we've got the land grab is now starting. You know, what's remaining? How fast can we trash it? We're seeing, I believe, the death throes of patriarchy. This isn't what you asked, sorry. I believe we're seeing the death throes of patriarchy in our insane need to put people, men of a particular kind, in positions of power who want to rape the planet as fast as they possibly can. So there is an extraordinary need for a quality of consciousness that can flip it. And that's not going to come from the men. And that's not me saying that men don't have feminine consciousness within them. We all have both. But what can come through women You know, it's edgy even to say women have a different quality of consciousness or a different power, or we're hormonally wired towards tending and befriending to ensuring that everybody is fine. But it's true. And it's edgy because women have been taught to subjugate ourselves to ensure that the male ego is propped up. The male ego has to go, quite frankly. And we're only going to do that if women actually decide to remember what we're made of and can bring a completely different consciousness. So many nice smiles from the
I'm
women.
desperately trying to suppress my ego. But, and we're going to come back to how all this helps you plant trees in a minute. But before we do, Charlotte, there's another example of a woman who's taking action. Charlotte, as the one of the leaders of the climate strikes here in Scotland, you had an audience with Nicola Sturgeon, as I said in my introduction. If you had that audience again, in fact, you may well have that audience again. Who knows? You do. So, what are you going to say this time?
Okay. So, well, because these are the youth strikers here as well, and
Hey.
we're all, yeah. We're lucky enough to go and meet Nicola Sturgeon again. I think we all have quite a few questions for her. But the main things that I want to focus on is schools, because that's something I'm very knowledgeable about. I think there's a lot of potential that could be done in schools because it produces so much waste and there's so much that isn't done. For instance, last year we eat out of plastic cutlery, cardboard boxes. We don't have any recycling bins in our school, not a proper recycling system. It's really bad. And we've basically spoken to the local council, trying getting like a better system implicated. And it's taken ages. We've been doing it for like last year. And only in the next 2 months, we're actually getting recycling bins. And I've spoken to Nicola about this previously. And she basically told me to speak to the local council or like COSLA, which is like represents all the local councils in Scotland. And it's just such a frustrating procedure. Nothing really gets done. So I'd really want to speak to that again and try and get like a national strategy put in place by her, because I feel like the council would take it a lot more seriously and also like improve the education about climate change, because that is really poor as well.
And can I ask, what are you doing to spread that message with other schools beyond your own school? Are you trying to...
When I spoke to the local council, I tried to see if we could do it firstly in our whole local area of all the high schools. They basically told me that they couldn't. I don't know why.
Ignore them.
Yeah, so we could only do it in ours, but that's one main message with like all of the youth strikers that we're trying to push. Yeah.
You should get together with Claire. She said ignore them. And
yeah.
She's very effective at that.
Yeah.
She said afterwards you
so,
should...
Yeah, so that is one thing that I think is achievable, is very achievable to do.
Well, thank you.
I'd also...
Yeah, go.
Also think what we should definitely do is restore peatlands. I don't know if people know about them. Yes. And I don't think people do know about them. They're basically carbon sinks that store like twice as much as CO2 as trees. And like 20% of all Scotland has them. So I feel like we have quite a global responsibility to restore them. And like 80% of them are being like deprived. So I'd want to speak to her about that as well. And maybe ask her about how she, like the government subsidising the oil and gas companies, especially after they declared a climate emergency. So those are the things.
So I think, as a few of you know, the First Minister is going to be on this stage a little later on, so you've got a lot of ammunition of things to throw at her later on.
Yeah.
So, Fiona, I want to come back to you. I want to ask you a question. Your organisation spends so much time on the ground working with Indigenous communities, but the question I have is what can we learn from them as opposed to what we're telling them all the time? What can we learn to be better guardians of our ecosystems from them?
So I feel, sitting on this platform, extremely mere in terms of being a simple jobbing lawyer. But the one thing that I do feel very strongly about, that I've had confirmed to me time after time after time, is that we do not understand and do not pay attention to the extraordinary levels of really sophisticated knowledge and understanding that lie within our Indigenous communities. The whole business of social media and the way in which you can instantly communicate with anybody, in any part of the world pretty much these days, means that we have no excuse not to know and understand the wealth of Indigenous knowledge that we have long since ignored, but which sits inside every single one of us. And when Stephen and I were talking earlier about how I was going to answer his proposed questions, I said I wanted to tell a little tale about one of my favourite authors, a man called Bruce Chatwin. I don't know how many of you have read the songlines. Well, then you'll all remember his wonderful recounting of Travelling Man and how the man swaddles the baby and walks around a room at 3.8 miles an hour, and the baby's been screeching at its mother for the last 2.5 hours, driving her insane and into the gin bottle. Sorry about the gin tent, but into the gin bottle. The man picks up the child, wanders around the room for 1.5 minutes, and the child's asleep. And the reason why is because the child knows that where it is now is as good as it gets, with its daddy, on the road, watchful for absolutely everything. Now, there are hundreds, and I'm sure that my fellow participants have got millions of stories about the value of this kind of knowledge and understanding. In this room, you've all got that sitting inside you. Most of us have forgotten it, pay no attention to it, and frankly, that is one of our stupidities, because it is the understanding that you can find within these communities, that you can learn about, which gives you back the kind of energies that are being talked about here with the trees. And what really interests me about it all is how you can pack that into the practice of law. And it's really quite tricky, because you're looking at, say, for example, in Namibia, a local community can choose to resolve a dispute either by customary law or by common law. So that's a choice that they can make. And we could learn a tremendous amount from the customary law that we've chosen to walk around and say, well, that's primitive, it's tribal, and it's of no conceivable use to us. And the land rights that were being mentioned earlier is an absolutely perfect example of this. Protomos was invited, for reasons I still don't understand, to become a member of the Clinton Global Initiative. And at that time, there were some really serious deals going on through which small economic entities like families could purchase the opportunity to identify the land that they owned. And then the key thing was get credit against it. And you look at all the microfinance things that are actually locked into land rights, and what you see is the Western way of thinking. This is a wonderful moment for you to say you own your land and then borrow against the ownership of your land. Now, why borrow? Okay, why borrow? Why do you have to borrow? That's because that's how we think. It's completely unsustainable. What happens is that people then put together little microfinance businesses, they get lost, they lose their home, and then they become part of an economic migrant constituency, which is heartbreaking and very difficult to litigate against. So we now belong to something called the Global Land Tenure Network, and I'm delighted to say that the way in which people look at saying, no, this is our land, is being done now by communities. Because in the end, the way forward in all of these issues is through the impact of communities. There's a community in this room. Charlotte has made a community with her schools and her protesters here. It's actually when you put together communities where you've got common values and you can push and shove and maybe in our case get into court and create a case law precedent, which then binds generations to come. That's why the law is absolutely crucial. Used correctly, it can create precedent, and then indeed on top of precedent, people then change policy. So, sorry, that was rather...
No, it's great. And I would add to that adding skills to communities is essential. And one of the skills, Sophie, is STEM skills. STEM skills are clearly going to be critical for the transition to a carbon-free economy. Although I saw a couple of days ago when the GCSE results came out here, there was a closing of the gap of STEM skills. The girls have done a lot better. But that really needs to accelerate to have allow women to participate in this transition, STEM skills. Can you talk a little bit about that and the importance of that?
Sure. I mean, I think the issue has never been that women, the intake of women into STEM job is not so much a problem. It's how do you retain them so they don't get deterred by working environment that is very unfavorable to their thriving or their leadership. That's really where the biggest problem is. There's definitely a problem of education that's in developed economies I was talking about. In emerging economies, there's a huge missed opportunity if women don't acquire those skills, because that's really what's going to give them the independence to join the economy from the comfort of their home, to become banked. I mean, if you see at all the really interesting development in terms of smart agriculture, technologies using drones, sensors, satellite data. I mean, the potential of transformation is colossal, but indeed, it makes the acquisition of those skills a real urgency. And
our government's doing enough to encourage girls to get into the sciences and into maths and technology.
No, is the answer. At the Women's Forum, we're really trying to, identify what are the leakages, which is a terrible analogy, but it's everywhere around the pipeline. And yes, it starts at school with how parents educate their girls, or mothers and fathers, how school teachers even themselves start to understand the link between STEM skills and women economic empowerment. So it's a massively complex and holistic issue. So the answer is definitely not enough is done. And if you look at the energy industry, I think they're predicting 18 million new jobs by 2030. If you look at and all these industries are male dominated. So it's will we have the solution that is adequate to address the issues that women face, to address the issues that we face as a society, and will women be able to participate? So that's a real urgency, and I think the climate lens really add a layer of urgency to that issue.
Do you want to add something to that, Fiona? Quickly.
May I just say that I think there's a postscript. I think looking at the cross-disciplinary approach that needs to be taken in order for the right skills to be brought into the right position is something that needs new thought. And I think in terms, particularly in my area, of the match between lawyers and anthropologists. There's plenty of lawyers who are quite happy to parachute themselves in and do one job with one Indigenous community and then find their way out again, leaving mayhem behind them, because they have not understood. They have not understood how a community works. What we want to do in Protemos, and we want to do it with everybody, is actually make sure that there is an anthropological basis upon which people reach understandings about the kind of community, Indigenous knowledge that we were actually speaking about a moment ago. So you can actually lock it all up and make it make sense and make it utterly compelling when you come to take the argument to whoever is resisting you, be it a judge, a government lawyer, a politician, whoever. You need to have the science which says this is the right way to do it, and this is how we know it's the right way to do it, and if you do it the right way, then it'll work.
Yeah. And talking of being utterly compelling, we have, I think, probably most of the people in this room have seen the terrible pictures of the Amazon burning. I'm going to go to questions in a minute. Before I do, Claire, I want you to talk about trees. I want you to talk about reforestation and the role of reforestation in helping us alleviate climate change. You've got 3 minutes. A bit more than that.
He knows me too well. It's not going to be just forest restoration. It needs to be forest protection urgently. The world seems to think that we can strip the old-growth forests and put monoculture plantations in their place and think that's going to be a solution. We absolutely have to stop driving forest destruction now. That's paramount. And what's going on is fundamentally unconscionable, and it is life-threatening. What people don't understand, what we're suffering from in our mechanistic patriarchal consciousness is that we live in a joined-up world with joined-up ecosystems. And the only reason we have a temperate climate here is because of the tropics and the poles. And if we lose the poles, and we're losing the poles faster than they ever imagined possible, then we're going to lose the Gulf Stream. Now, my environmental life started with nightmares. I had nightmares that there were no more clouds, and that was 20 years ago. It could happen. England could have no more clouds. That means no more rainfall. That means no more food. We like to think that England will always be soggy and wet. It's not going to be. We need the poles and we need the rainforest because the differential between the heat and the cold is what creates the ocean currents. It's what creates the air currents. Forests themselves aren't just green leafy things that are there to use. They're actually the planetary hydrators. When you have a forested continent, the transpiration, the water that emerges and flies up to create the flying rivers, sucks in moisture from the oceans. So the presence of forest actually draws water. It then channels that water either through their body. Think of rain as water that has gone multiple times through the body of a tree. I mean, it's the most exquisite substance. We go, oh, it's raining, and it's just like, this is a miracle falling from the sky. The tree roots themselves then are the conduit through which that water drains down and fills the aquifers. So if you're looking at a tree, you're looking at rain, you're looking at rivers, you're looking at springs, you're looking at underground water, you're looking at agriculture, you're looking at soil, you're looking at biodiversity, you're looking at the air that we breathe. You basically cannot live without them. When you strip a continent of its forest, the Amazon is at its tipping point right now. Right now, it could go. Because it's drying out. It shouldn't be burning the way it is. Why is it burning? Because it's drying out. Why is it drying out? Because we've lost too much of it. 20% of it's gone, another 20% of it's degraded. When you strip a continent of its trees to a certain degree, the ocean then starts pulling the moisture from that continent out from the land. So we completely dehydrate. And then when there's no forest, then when it does rain, that water just runs off and takes the topsoil with it. And then that runs into the ocean and kills the coral. But we know the coral is dying anyway because the CO2 isn't being locked into trees, it's being sunk into the oceans. This is really cheerful.
How many trees do we need to plant?
The latest studies are saying 1.2 trillion, and that's what available land there is.
It's about the size of Texas.
It's not going to do it. It's going to take a hell of a lot more than that. It's going to take massive sustainable agriculture, completely transforming the way that we work with our soils, getting rid of nitrates. Nobody understands that classical agriculture, nitrous oxide, is 300 times more potent than CO2. Show me a country that's not pouring nitrates into the ground. Nitrates which, incidentally, kill the mycelial network that trees use to communicate with each other. So we're killing trees in every which way we possibly can. The purpose of Tree Sisters is to make it as normal to give back to nature as it currently is to take nature for granted. It's about reseeding reciprocity with nature. Because we, as a consumer species, we have basically normalized taking without ever thinking about giving back. Like we're chewing through our planet and expecting her to be able to just keep giving to us because that's what she does. The world I see in the age of restoration, which I claim starts right now, is a world in which you cannot take from the planet without giving back. It's not just that our consumption patterns need to change colossally and our consciousness that creates the new thought that needs to happen. It's that we need to embed restoration inside of every single thing so that nature's face is here and we understand that we're part of it and that we poison her, we poison ourselves. If we strip her, we strip ourselves. If we poison our air and we get rid of everything, we've got rid of ourselves. We're on an absolute mission to destroy ourselves as fast as possible. And frankly, if we're not doing something about that, every single one of us, and the very least we should all be doing is contributing to tropical reforestation every month, which is what we're doing. Because if you're sitting here and you're flicking switches every day and you're not sucking that down into trees, then you're basically saying climate change is fine. And nobody in here thinks climate change is fine. But we have so normalized the fact that taking is better than giving back that that's just what we're doing. It has to become the new norm to give back. It has to become that if this takes from our planet in the way that is destructive, it simply doesn't happen because this lot will never have what we had. It's gone already. And if we're not doing anything, we're saying that's appropriate. And it is not appropriate, not on our watch. And we have a very, very short window of time. The indigenous people of this world, all around the world, cannot see beyond 2026. They can't see anymore. We've got 5 years to sink every tree we can into the ground, to shift our agriculture, to shift our economy, to get enough women into positions of leadership so that taking care of everybody becomes the new priority. It's no longer about a single white bloody man sitting in authority saying short-term greed and wealth and so-called power that has been all to do with money and is nothing to do with money. Power is about what we can do for everybody. It's how we restore our world. It's about dignity and it's about the protection of the indigenous people of this planet who are the last remaining custodians of true sanity.
Wow. So I do want to say, I mean, you embody women taking action for climate change, but I do want to say, as a representative of the pale, male and stale community, men, we're not all bad.
I didn't say we were.
We also do believe, some of us have a conviction that this is incredibly important. That's my own little thing. Let's go to questions. There's a few. We're going to take 3 at a time. So 1, 2, 3, and we'll come back.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Fiona, I wanted particularly to address to you, you talked about the power of community. And I think we're all members of a community in some shape or form. Here we're a member of the Tweeddale community, I'm a member of the health community, I'm a health professional, and I'm a member of the Extinction Rebellion community. And I just want to pick up a bit on what Clare said, and Paul Van Zyl said yesterday, how we all have to be activists now. And I think one of the things is that we all can be active in different ways. We don't need to all to lie in the street. There's gradations of things we can all do. For example, the climate strike, which has been called by Greta Thunberg and in which Charlotte and her colleagues are going to be involved with on the 20th of September, people are being asked to go on strike in some shape or form to call attention to the climate crisis. People may not feel able to go on strike or not want to. We're having silent vigils throughout the country, asking people to come in Peebles outside the post office, 5 o'clock on the 20th of September, silent vigil. Everybody feels comfortable doing different things. On the 31st of this month in Galashiels, there's a green gathering where we're having a speaker from Extinction Rebellion.
This is a call to action. Is there a question as well?
The question is, does Fiona feel that to what extent can we utilise these communities locally as well as globally to make a difference?
Thank you. So, activists, let's take that now. Can you?
Yeah. So the communities that I think that everything that you're speaking about is completely fantastic. But I wonder how many people in this room have experienced absolutely endemic, deep, gut-wrenching, lengthy poverty. The communities that we work with are built around all sorts of different dignities and legal understandings and mutual dependence, if you like. And they work in the face of tremendous environmental difficulties. So I would distinguish between the communities that you are a member of and communities where they're living right on the edge. And I would say that when there are survival issues which engage, those tend, on the whole, to come before anything else at all. And so people that we work with in Africa, I mean, this sounds like a gross generalisation, and in some senses that's exactly what it is for the purposes of answering a question here now. But they have got competing concerns. And one of the things that I find quite shaming and difficult to deal with is the underlying cultural assumption that where I come from is beyond measure affluent, and that we really should be doing stuff. But they don't see us doing stuff. So they don't really have any hope that we're going to. And I've come to the conclusion over the years that actually the way forward is to do small things well, and then to have them gradually begin to back up. So these huge ideas that I'm hearing on either side of me, they are unbelievable and wonderful. And I'm left with, okay, you can't do class actions in Lesotho. So if you want to bring any kind of an action in a Lesotho court, you've got to go all the way around the village because everybody's got to give permission for their spouse to stick their name on the issue of a proceedings. And there might be all kinds of other complications. I deal in the undergrowth of it all. And so therefore all I'm saying is that the contrast between here and now and what it's like in an absolutely dirt-poor village in the mountains of Lesotho is almost impossible to describe without pictures. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. I want to get in 3 more questions, so let's be fairly brief, Peter. Thank you.
I don't think it's one solution. I think it's lots of solutions. But the buzzword, I think, is urgency, particularly in relation to forests. And we live in the market economy. It isn't that long ago that Terry Wogan bought up a couple of forests in Scotland to cut down the forest, send it off to Canada because the price of wood was valuable then. So I'm quite supportive of local solutions and how they can permeate and create a legal framework. But what about the bigger issues? This market economy enables people to buy up products that are definite and reliable and required for our future.
Do you,
I would like to. Can I have one brief?
Yes, and then Stefan. We'll go to Stefan. Sorry.
So I think that is an absolutely key question, which is why I've hogged a moment to answer it from my perspective. I'm absolutely convinced from my years as an environmental lawyer that you can solve many of these issues by putting the right taxes on the right products. So if you actually say this particular product costs this much environmentally to produce, the entire marketplace would be transformed over a period of time. And people would stop buying the stuff that is not acceptable for an economic reason. The economic reason is the really quick answer to all of this. If you make it too damned expensive, people will stop buying it. They're not bothered about its any of its origins, or how many people in a Bangladeshi clothing factory went to make that, how many gallons of water. You just tax it with a meaningful approach from government. Tax it to hell, and people will stop buying it. And I think that is the quick fix.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stefan.
I would like to contribute with a technique, if I may. What you have raised are all valid points. But there is one area where I would like to make a suggestion and therefore a question. How to actually embarrass this bully, the male patriarchic society. There is one thing that I must tell you, and it's a secret perhaps, nothing makes them more destabilized than irony. What I call the technique of constructive embarrassment. No, seriously, politicians are very good at presenting their positions, but they are extremely weak when they are being ridiculized, okay, or when there is an ironic approach. I'll give you one example, and then I was asked for 1 year to be on loan from the UN to WWF, Italy. The issue was hunters. They were killing anything moving, including butterflies, and they were doing it a very long period. So the idea we got was we will have to lobby against the lobby of the rifles. How? By organizing 1,153 concerts in the middle of the woods at the opening of the hunting season. Why? Well, because we will replace the singing of the birds, which are disappearing. We will make the birds flying away, and therefore there will be no one to be hunting anymore. The hunters were extremely powerful, but 1,000 and more concerts, including gliders with Bach music over the woods in order to make it, produced such a sympathetic, supportive issue regarding how to stop the hunting that in fact the law was changed, because the politicians didn't know how to reply to that. In other words, irony can be extremely effective.
Thank you. There's another form of activism. Thank you. We've got 5. Is there one more? I can take one more question, and I'm going to ask you all to just wrap up. So one more question, and then we'll have a wrap-up session. So get ready for the wrap-up. Yep. Question behind you, the gentleman in the beard. Yes, at the back.
Yeah, good afternoon. We all sit here in smug disregard for all this pollution that we're causing. And what I'd like to say is that 50% of our food gets brought in from all parts of the world. At any one time, there's 4,200 airplanes in the air, and how many cars are running, using oxygen and putting out huge amounts of carbon. And what these people do is blame farming. Now, I've been farming all my life, and I've taken huge offence at that suggestion that it's us that's causing all this pollution. Now, if it wasn't for the combustion engine or rocketry or the burning of fossil fuels, I'm blinking well sure we wouldn't have or be in the problems that we have now.
And your question, sir?
That's it. The question is, how do you answer what I've just told you? Absolutely, and I hope you're on the spot.
Right. I hope who's on the spot? I'm not sure anybody would disagree with, I think the people here on this stage all agree that we have to look at our transport systems and also our agricultural systems. Everything is in play here. The world is at stake. So what we're trying to do here is talk about solutions. So I'm going to, I did ask you to come and, so could we have a microphone here?
In the broadsheets the other day, there was, if I remember, a report of Ethiopia planting, was it 2.84 million trees in one day, or some quite extraordinary
Over 300
project.
million.
Yeah, oh, you're right. So the challenge then is for every other government to follow that example, but how do we persuade them of the merit and the urgency?
So I know a lot of people who've been working in Ethiopia. Big problem in Ethiopia is goats. Goats will eat absolutely anything and they just run wild. So I'm really curious. I'm not going to knock Ethiopia. This is not me knocking Ethiopia. The way our brains have been wired is to say, let's do these really big gestures and then we can feel really great about ourselves. It's a really big gesture and it's a really great gesture. And, you know, Pakistan are doing the same and India keep doing it and all the rest of it. But actually, and so those trees are needed, and I really want to believe that they can be watered and taken care of, because actually what we're really needing are human relationships to be rebuilt with the natural world in a way that means we're all planting our trees, but we're also protecting them. And you can't plant in India, southern India anymore without drip irrigation. There's no groundwater. In a lot of these places, the problem is so bad that if you're not actually going out and watering and putting fences around these things, they're simply not going to survive. So there's a bigger game. I mean, Tree Sisters, we're going to launch the Year of the Tree, We're deciding it's going to be 2021. We're going to look for a global campaign. We're going to see if we can plant trees in the hearts and minds of the absolute masses. We're going to use trees as consciousness shifters. We're going to see what we can do collectively, but we have to put it in the hands of the masses. It can't always be people waiting for so-called leadership to make the big gestures. It has to become normalized in our lives. So I've got people calling me frequently saying, you know, we want to do this major planting, and I'm saying, can you actually build a relationship with communities who need these trees in order to transform their ecology and their economy, and can you stay in relationship with them to ensure that these trees actually do mature and that these trees aren't just going to be the wrong species in the wrong place doing the wrong thing, which we consistently do because we put money above any form of common sense. And that's the track I'm on. The track I'm on is, okay, it's fabulous. We need all of these things. You know, the big gestures, what they do is they create this sense of possibility. We need possibility now like never before. We need a sense of hope. So it's all valid. I just want to speak to what you were saying and what you were saying as well. I'm not somebody that likes shaming. I stay away from shame. I'm completely allergic to it. This whole business of embarrassing, I love it. It's great. And there's a line here, because what we actually need to do, to me, is we need to redefine convenience. Completely need to redefine convenience, because convenience is killing us. The so-called convenience of the quick fix of what we need, having what we want in the moment that we need it, without thinking about where it's come from, what that impact has had. We're too damn lazy and too convenience-oriented and too also burnt out, frankly, by the pace of our world that has got so fast and so technologized now that we can't feel the truth of what's actually going on in our bodies, as if our bodies aren't this planet walking around. You know, we're going to have to slow down massively to be able to feel, and then start to make the death of our ecosystems completely financially and socially unacceptable. And that is going to sit in the hands of the masses, because we're the ones that drive consumption. So waking up to our responsibility to understand what we're doing and the impact that it's having, and then creating systems that literally make it unacceptable. You know, during Year of the Tree, we're going to do what we can with masses of NGOs around the world and social media, like media organizations, to create campaigns that help raise awareness of how our consumption drives old growth deforestation. But I'm sitting in a country, I live in California, by the way, which is terrifying with the fires. But I'm sitting in a country here that's trying to build a new railway through something like 68 old growth forests. How many patches of old growth forests do we have? Why is that considered politically acceptable? You know, there's enough power in this room if we all got together and actually started shouting about something to really do something. You know, I sat in Oxford Circus with Extinction Rebellion speaking while God knows how many people walked past trying not to see what was going on, because we're so terrified of the status quo being rocked. The status quo is over. It's officially over. We're in the Wild West now in terms of what's possible. And what that means, and this is me wrapping up, what this means is that all the cultural norms about what it means to be acceptable are done. All the social norms are done. Women, we were not born to be acceptable. We were not born to be tame and tidy and deodorized and God knows what else we're supposed to be, a particular shape, a particular way, think a certain way. That is not what a woman is. We are going to have to redefine completely from the inside out and reclaim what it means to be woman and bring a different consciousness and a different leadership to this planet. The men get to actually question how we are all colluding with a system that is based on the death of our planet and all the unexamined assumptions that go along with the way that we're living that is destroying our world. This belongs to all of us. We are all implicit, all complicit, and we all have the solutions inside us, or we wouldn't be alive now. I absolutely believe that if we are alive now at this most crucial time in our whole blinking evolution, back into reverence for nature, then we have got something to bring. And that is my parting thing. That, and go to treesisters.org and sign up and start planting trees with us. Like every single person. If you're not planting trees, why not?
I'm going to desperately try and get back on the status quo. Do sign up to Tree Sisters. We're going to go to lunch now. But before we do, before you all get up, Sophie, I want you to, I'm not going to ask all, you've already had a roundup, but Sophie, I want you to give a sort of pithy roundup for everybody, something to leave us with.
Yeah, well, my focus is on what will give us the fastest return on investment, and that is in investing in the education of girls. The Project Drawdown says this is the biggest, that will have the biggest positive impact of climate change, which is going to support all the things that Claire is talking about, is really deeply understanding the connection between gender and climate, for the gender lens to be included in every policy strategy initiative that relates to climate. I think that's going, if there's the one node in the network that will have the biggest ripple effect, is that one. So that's our focus, and it's about making the case for that. It's about equipping organization, government with a sense of what a sustainable and equal world looks like. We are currently in a volatile and unequal world. Where are we going next? I think it's really activating the transformative power of women and girls is for me the absolute focus.
Thank you. Charlotte, thank you too, and thank you for all of your colleagues for being here, and good luck with your audience with Nicola Sturgeon later on. And everybody, thank you for your patience, and we're going to move from the sauna to the hammam, somewhere at the back over there, and bon appetit. Thank you.